It's called Adventures in Mediumship, or We Have Met the Messenger and She Is Us. There's a term that's getting a lot of play these days, BFFs, best friends forever. She's my BFF, I've often heard my young nieces say. Those of us who are a tad older know how rare it is when a friendship actually survives the test of time. And though 50 may be the new 25, to quote a newspaper headline tacked up on my fridge, as one passes that mid-century benchmark, one may find oneself pondering the question, could friendships last forever? If we do transcend the death of our earthly body, do our friendships too? My friend David had been a cherished and loyal buddy to me for more than 20 years. He was such an integral part of my life that when he died, my day-to-day existence had been palpably changed. And yet, through my remarkable experiences with mediumship, I'd come to feel that David was likely, in some way, still around. Since his death, I'd had a tangible sense several times that he was close by. Once I'd been watching the old movie Oklahoma. I'd always loved old musicals, yet had somehow never seen this classic. As I watched, I felt him hovering over my left shoulder, letting out his characteristic giggle, as if he found the show incredibly corny and thus hilarious. The feeling had been so strong that a few days later, I emailed his sister and told her about it. She asked if I'd known that David had played the trombone in a pit orchestra for a local production of that very show in high school, and said that indeed he'd loved making fun of it. I told her I hadn't known it, but that now my experience made total sense. It was just what he would have done if he'd been there in the flesh. The most notable instance when I'd felt David's presence was at his funeral service in his native Long Island. I had been asked, along with one other friend, to deliver a eulogy. After the service, we'd all been invited to David's childhood home. At one point, I left the throng and went to a corner of the living room where there was an upright piano. In my visits to this house, I'd never seen the piano actually played. It seemed more a surface to house knickknacks and such. On top of it was a large headshot of a beaming David. As I stood staring at the familiar face of my beloved friend, I had a vivid, startling sense of him jumping out of the picture at me. I felt his presence coming out of it, loving and comforting, as if in waves. I'd never experienced anything like it. Shortly after David's service, I started to assemble my dream team and had my first reading with psychic Maggie Moyse. Though Maggie didn't claim to be a medium, per se, as I had chatted with her via email after the reading, I told her a close friend of mine had died and asked if she could possibly pick up any information on him. I shared nothing about him but his first name, and then sent her his photo and date of birth at her request. She said that she would see what she could do. A few days later, I heard from Maggie. She described a number of things about David that resonated with me. One, his sense now of utter freedom and release. She said he was showing himself to her naked, but that this was purely symbolic. Although I had to laugh because David had been a big fan of nude beaches, often trying to rally his friends to shed our inhibitions and join him. Two, his concern over a boy he had left behind. David had been survived by a nephew who'd lost his father as a baby, and he and David had been very close. Three, his powerful love of music. David had played the trombone, worked in music management when younger, and was passionate about music of all kinds. And four, the fact that he loved to write. He had written and edited for most of his career. She told me she was seeing a bear cub, which she thought pertained to the Chicago baseball team, the Cubs. In fact, David and I had a mutual friend who lived in Chicago, with whom David, a baseball fan, had attended a number of Cubs games, and she described his witty, charming personality to a T. Maggie had done very well, I thought. With no last name to go on, she had no ability to Google David and find out such details about his life. Still, I'd been hoping she'd pick up something more personal, something David might reference that only I would know. A few days later, I got my wish. Last night, I was sleeping with David's photo under my pillow, and I got the image of an upright piano, Maggie wrote in an email. A family piano that is sort of like furniture, but is sometimes played at holidays or whatnot. A little zing shot right through me. It was possible, of course, that she was psychically picking up on that moment I'd stood gazing at David's portrait. didn't necessarily prove that he, in spirit, had actually been there at the time. Either way, though, it gave me some validation that the moment I'd experienced in front of the piano had been as unique and significant as it felt. A few weeks later, I got an email about a message circle that medium Jennifer Hicks was holding, a group of people gathering under Jennifer's tutelage to attempt to collectively receive messages from the dead. My money was even tighter than usual, partly due to all the readings, workshops, and sessions. Still, Jennifer apparently didn't hold these circles often, so I signed up to attend. The next day, at a movie screening with my friend Frankie, I told him about my plans. "Why are the dead always so chatty and communicative and at every medium's beck and call?" he asked. He's a comedy writer, so you'll see. "I'm telling you right now, when I'm dead, I plan to make myself unavailable." He paused. "I love you, Annie, but if I go first, don't contact me unless you have an antidote for whatever it was that killed me. And don't ask me to watch over anyone unless it's a cute brunette who enjoys walking around without her clothes." He laughed at his own joke, and I chuckled too, as I promised to respect his wishes. The day before the message circle, I sat in my threadbare armchair, wondering what David would think about my desire to be in touch. He'd been skeptical about phenomena like mediumship, but he'd also been highly curious, someone who liked to push boundaries and test things out. I wondered what he might show me were he to pop in. I thought of Maine and California, the two places outside the tri-state area to which we'd traveled together. I also thought he might show me something to do with music or theater, two of his greatest loves. But the one thing David would most likely use to identify himself, I concluded, was the fact that he had celiac disease, an autoimmune disorder of the small intestine, which requires the person who suffers from it to maintain a strictly gluten-free diet. David had been diagnosed with celiac later in life, after a long period of feeling ill and not knowing why. Once he knew the culprit, he'd gone after it with a vengeance. He joined a celiac support group, gone on a passionate crusade to educate restaurants, even had t-shirts designed for the cause, which at that time was not nearly as well known as it is now. David was vigilant about screening what he ate and missed the foods he'd grown up on, especially baked goods. His mother, since college, had sent him care packages of homemade cookies, pastries, and brownies. After his diagnosis, he was constantly scouting out gluten-free bakeries and specialty shops, much harder to find in those days too. If anything like that came up in a message, I'd be hard-pressed not to believe it was David dropping in. The event took place in a New Age center. Interested and open as I was to things metaphysical, places like this, with their pointedly soothing decor, complete with candles, incense, sorry guys, hanging ribs, silken feng shui doodads, and miniature plug-in waterfalls made me cringe. It just felt so cliched. It was stuff like this, I thought, as I took in the man seated at the reception area with a massive crystal dangling on his open-shirted chest and his hair slicked back into a tiny man bun, what my brother-in-law had once called a dork knob, that made the New Age movement so easy to mock. David was probably having a field day if he was indeed hovering about. The New Age hipster proved remarkably friendly, leaving me feeling slightly guilty for my less than generous thoughts, and he directed me toward the proper room with a genuine smile. Oops. It's David. As I passed by a door with the sign, "Clearing in Progress," I thought back to the clearing I'd had with Roger Antonelli. That's an earlier chapter in the book. So I wondered, could one just walk in and get cleared here in the way one could go in for, say, an oil change or a mani-pedi? Finally, I arrived and met Jennifer face to face. A slim, attractive woman of approximately my own age, with glasses and a head of curly, shoulder-length hair, she greeted me warmly and invited me to join the 8 or 10 participants who were already seated in the dimly lit space. Jennifer explained that we would start off with a guided meditation to open our channels, and then see what messages we could collectively pull in. She instructed us to be open to what we received, to remove our censors, and to say whatever came into our head, even if it seemed nonsensical. something that meant nothing to us might well mean something to someone else. She also explained that she'd started to develop her own psychic abilities many years before in a circle like this one, and expressed her belief that we all possessed such abilities to varying degrees. With practice, she said, we could develop them. I had the vague notion that I'd heard this idea before. Perhaps I'd read it, but I'd never quite taken it to heart. Now that I'd been told several times, though, how psychic I was, perhaps it was time for me to get to work testing it out. Perhaps those abilities I'd longed for as a girl and despaired of having were there, simply lying in wait for me to put in the time and effort to unleash them. ... Thank you very much.